The beer bottle shattered against the wall just inches from Marcus Thompson's head as the drunk sports fans erupted in cruel laughter, thinking they'd found the perfect target to blame for their team's losing streak. They saw the wheelchair first, the bad luck charm second, and never bothered to notice the haunted steel-gray eyes that had once peered through rifle scopes in Afghanistan's deadliest valleys. The scarred man in the standard black wheelchair sat there silently, his powerful shoulders rigid with the kind of control that came from years of holding steady while everything around him fell apart. They saw weakness in an easy victim. They saw someone who couldn't fight back or escape their alcohol-fueled rage. They had no idea they were about to face the brotherhood of the United States Army's most lethal marksman, and that the small sniper badge, barely visible on his worn leather jacket, represented skills that had saved more lives than they could ever imagine. For more powerful videos about our military heroes, please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us continue to tell these important stories. Marcus Thompson, 34 years old, sat in the corner booth of Mickey's Sports Bar, his wheelchair positioned against the wall with the same tactical precision he'd once used to select sniper hides in hostile territory. His dark brown hair was shorter now than during his military days, touched with premature gray that spoke of experiences most men his age would never face. His steel gray eyes held a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion, the kind of soul-deep fatigue that came from seeing too much death and carrying too many memories that civilian therapists called survivor's guilt. He wore a simple black t-shirt and faded jeans, his massive upper body still carrying the disciplined muscle of a soldier despite the standard medical wheelchair that had been his reality for the past 3 years. The chair was functional, built for daily navigation rather than athletics, but Marcus had learned to move through the world with the same silent efficiency he'd once brought to combat operations. What most people didn't see, or chose to ignore, was the small Army sniper badge on his worn leather jacket, placed there not for recognition, but as a reminder of the precision, patience, and dedication that had defined his military service. The badge was tarnished now, like so many other things in his post-service life, but it represented skills and experiences that had shaped him into one of the Army's most effective long-range specialists. Marcus had chosen Mickey's Sports Bar for reasons that had nothing to do with entertainment and everything to do with survival. The corner booth offered clear sight lines to all entrances, positioned his back against a solid wall, and provided quick access to the emergency exit. These weren't casual preferences, they were tactical necessities that helped him manage the hypervigilance and anxiety that made civilian social situations feel like potential combat zones. The bar was supposed to be neutral territory, a place where he could watch games, nurse a single beer for hours, and practice being around people without the isolation that had consumed him since his medical retirement. His therapist at the VA had recommended gradual social reintegration as part of his treatment for PTSD and adjustment disorder. What she hadn't warned him about was how cruel civilians could be to veterans whose wounds were visible. Tonight was supposed to be different. Tonight his old unit was playing in a charity softball game across town, and he'd promised himself he'd go afterward. His first social interaction with fellow soldiers since leaving Walter Reed Medical Center. But first he needed to prove to himself that he could handle a simple evening in a civilian bar without having a panic attack or flashback. The irony wasn't lost on him that the man who had once provided Overwatch protection for entire platoons now needed protection from drunk football fans, angry about a game that ultimately meant nothing. The first sign of trouble came during halftime of the Monday night football game, when the local team was down by 2 touchdowns and the bar's patrons were looking for someone to blame for their disappointment. Alcohol, frustration, and toxic masculinity created a dangerous combination that seemed to focus on the quiet man in the wheelchair who obviously didn't belong in their testosterone-fueled sanctuary. The ringleader was Danny Walsh, a 38-year-old construction worker whose weekend warrior fantasies and beer-fueled courage made him dangerous to anyone he perceived as weak. His crew consisted of his drinking buddies, Tommy Martinez, whose multiple DUIs hadn't taught him anything about poor judgment, Jake Phillips, whose steroid rage was barely contained on good days, and Kevin O'Brien, whose gambling losses had him looking for someone else to blame for all his problems. They'd been watching Marcus for an hour, their comments growing louder and more vicious as their blood alcohol levels rose and their team's chances of winning decreased. "Look at that guy over there," Danny said loudly enough for half the bar to hear, "just sitting there taking up space, probably on disability, living off our tax dollars while real men work for a living." The comment hit Marcus like a physical blow. His disability compensation was earned through 3 tours of duty in Afghanistan, where he'd confirmed over 200 enemy kills while providing Overwatch protection for infantry units operating in the world's most dangerous combat zones. But explaining that would require engaging with people whose ignorance was matched only by their cruelty. "Probably faking it for attention," Tommy added, his voice slurred with alcohol and stupidity. Half these guys aren't even really disabled. They just want special treatment and free money. Marcus had heard similar comments from other civilians, but tonight they cut deeper because he'd come here hoping to feel normal, to blend into the background of ordinary American life. Instead, he was being reminded that many of his countrymen saw veterans like him as burdens rather than people who had sacrificed for their freedom to drink beer and watch football in safety. As the game progressed and their team's performance worsened, Danny's group directed more of their alcohol-fueled anger toward Marcus, treating him like a scapegoat for their disappointment and frustration. "Hey, wheelchair guy," Danny shouted across the bar. "Your negative energy is jinxing our team. Maybe you should roll on home so real fans can watch in peace." The comment drew uncomfortable laughter from other patrons who were too drunk or too cowardly to recognize the cruelty of harassing a disabled veteran. Marcus had dealt with enemy combatants who were more honorable than these civilians who hid their prejudice behind alcohol and peer pressure. Jake Phillips, emboldened by the group's laughter, decided to escalate the harassment. "Yeah, this is a sports bar, not a hospital. Take your pity party somewhere else." The words hit Marcus in places that enemy bullets had never reached. During his deployment, he'd been respected by his fellow soldiers, valued for his skills, and trusted with missions that required the highest level of professional competence. Here, in the country he'd served, he was being treated like an unwelcome reminder of war's consequences. His hands tightened on his wheelchair armrests, muscle memory from countless hours of maintaining position while waiting for the perfect shot. The same patience and discipline that had made him a legendary sniper now helped him resist the urge to respond to civilian ignorance with the kind of violence he'd been trained to deliver with surgical precision. But the harassment wasn't finished. Kevin O'Brien, whose losses at the casino had left him looking for anyone to blame for his problems, saw Marcus as the perfect target for his displaced rage. "Look at him just sitting there like he owns the place," Kevin said loudly. "Probably expects us to feel sorry for him. Probably wants free drinks and special treatment. That's what's wrong with this country, too many people looking for handouts instead of working for what they get." The irony was devastating. Marcus had worked harder than any of these men could imagine, had earned his disability through service that none of them would have the courage to perform, and was asking for nothing more than the right to watch a football game without being harassed for his sacrifice. The situation reached its climax during the fourth quarter, when the home team was driving for a potential game-tying touchdown, and the bar's tension was at its peak. That's when Danny Walsh decided to make Marcus the focus of everyone's attention. "This whole game is cursed because of bad luck over there," he announced, pointing directly at Marcus. "Seriously, every time I look at that guy, something bad happens to our team. It's like having a rolling bad luck charm in here." The comment was cruel enough to make several patrons uncomfortable, but not cruel enough to make anyone intervene. Marcus had learned during his deployments that courage was rare, and civilian courage was almost non-existent when it might require personal risk or social discomfort. But Danny wasn't finished. Emboldened by the lack of opposition and fueled by hours of drinking, he decided to make his harassment more direct and personal. "Hey, broken soldier," he yelled across the bar, "do us all a favor and roll your sorry ass out of here. Nobody wants to look at your depressing face while we're trying to enjoy the game." The words cut through Marcus like shrapnel, reopening wounds that 3 years of therapy had barely begun to heal. He'd survived IED blasts, sniper duels, and mortar attacks, but civilian cruelty seemed designed to attack the parts of him that military training had never prepared him to defend. That's when Tommy Martinez, perhaps the drunkest of the group, decided to punctuate their harassment with action rather than just words. He grabbed his beer bottle and hurled it toward Marcus's corner booth, the glass exploding against the wall just inches from his head. "Oops," Tommy said with fake innocence. "Guess my aim isn't as good as yours probably was, sniper boy. Oh wait, you probably weren't even really in combat. Probably just some desk jockey pretending to be a war hero." The glass fragments on the floor reminded Marcus of the IED explosion that had ended his military career, the moment when his world had changed forever, when he'd gone from being one of the Army's most capable warriors to a disabled veteran struggling to find his place in a society that seemed to view him as a burden. But as the alcohol and anger clouded his judgment, something inside Marcus shifted. His steel-gray eyes, which had been dulled by 3 years of depression and isolation, began to show the cold fire that had once made enemy combatants fear American snipers. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through contacts he hadn't called in months, finding the number he'd been too proud to use for personal problems. Sergeant First Class Carlos Rodriguez was currently at the local American Legion Hall, where the annual charity softball game had just ended. 23 members of Marcus's former sniper unit were celebrating their victory, and all of them remembered the man who had taught them the patience, precision, and professionalism that had brought them all home alive. The phone rang twice before a familiar voice answered with the concern that never left military communications when a brother was calling. "Rodriguez here, Marcus, that you, brother?" "Carlos, it's me. I'm sorry to interrupt the celebration, but I need help." There was immediate silence on the other end, followed by the kind of focused attention that Marcus remembered from combat operations when lives were on the line. "Talk to me, Marcus. What's your situation?" "I'm at Mickey's Sports Bar on 5th Street, dealing with hostile civilians who are harassing me for being disabled. They've escalated to throwing objects and making threats. It's getting bad, Carlos." The silence stretched longer than usual, and Marcus could almost hear Rodriguez processing the implications. Every member of their unit knew what Marcus had sacrificed, what he'd lost, and what he continued to struggle with in civilian life. "Marcus, listen to me very carefully. Are you in immediate physical danger?" "Not immediate, but the situation is escalating. They're drunk, angry, and using me as a scapegoat for everything wrong in their lives. It's psychological warfare designed to drive me out. And honestly, it's working." Rodriguez understood. He'd seen how civilian ignorance could wound veterans in ways that enemy fire never could. How the people they'd sworn to protect could become their greatest source of pain and isolation. "Brother, I need you to hold your position. Don't let these civilian assholes drive you away from where you have every right to be. Don't give them that victory." "Carlos, I don't want to cause trouble. I just wanted to watch the game and maybe work up the courage to come see you guys afterward." "Marcus," Rodriguez said, using the tone that had once coordinated sniper operations in hostile territory, "you are the finest marksman this army ever produced. You saved more lives than any of us can count. You earned the right to drink beer and watch football anywhere in this country, and no civilian has the right to take that away from you." Rodriguez immediately began coordinating what would become one of the most precisely executed civilian interventions in military history. The charity softball game had ended an hour ago, but 23 members of Marcus's former sniper unit were still at the American Legion Hall, celebrating their victory and sharing stories about their legendary instructor. When Rodriguez explained the situation, the response was immediate and unanimous. Marcus wasn't just their former team leader, he was the man who had taught them the skills and discipline that had kept them alive during some of the war's deadliest missions. "Listen up," Rodriguez announced to the gathered snipers. "Our brother Marcus is under attack by hostile civilians at Mickey's Sports Bar. He's outnumbered, isolated, and needs our support." The room fell silent as 23 combat veterans processed the implications. These weren't random soldiers. They were elite marksmen who had served in the world's most dangerous locations, and they understood both military honor and the obligation to protect those who had protected them. Staff Sergeant Jennifer Chen, one of the unit's few female snipers, was the first to respond. "What's the plan, Rodriguez? How do we help him?" "We show these civilians what military brotherhood looks like," Rodriguez replied. "We demonstrate the difference between their weakness and our strength. We remind them that when they attack one of us, they attack all of us." Sergeant Mike Williams, whose life had been saved by Marcus's Overwatch protection during a Taliban ambush in 2018, stood up from his chair. "Marcus taught me how to make impossible shots under pressure. He's the reason my kids still have a father. Nobody disrespects him while I'm breathing." One by one, the other snipers shared similar stories, missions where Marcus's expertise had saved their lives, training sessions where his patience had made them better soldiers, moments when his leadership had kept them focused and alive during the chaos of combat. Within 15 minutes, 23 combat veterans were loading into cars and trucks, heading for Mickey's Sports Bar with the coordinated precision they'd learned during years of military operations. At 10:47 p.m., the front door of Mickey's Sports Bar opened and Rodriguez walked in, followed by 22 other members of Marcus's former sniper unit. They wore civilian clothes, jeans, polo shirts, veteran organization t-shirts, but their bearing was unmistakably military. They didn't march in like an occupying force. They simply filled the available space with the quiet confidence of professionals who had faced real enemies in actual combat zones. Their presence immediately changed the atmosphere from hostile to respectful, from chaotic to controlled. Danny Walsh and his crew, who had been so brave when harassing a disabled veteran, suddenly found themselves surrounded by men and women whose calm competence made their drunken aggression look pathetic and childish. Rodriguez walked directly to Marcus's corner booth, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder with the natural camaraderie of soldiers who had shared foxholes and trusted each other with their lives. "How you doing, Marcus?" he asked, his voice carrying the concern that never left military relationships even after discharge. "Better now," Marcus replied, his voice showing emotion for the first time in months. I didn't think anyone would come. Brother, Rodriguez said quietly, we will always come, always. But it was Sergeant Chen who delivered the observation that would reshape everyone's understanding of the evening's events. Ladies and gentlemen, she announced, addressing the entire bar, you've been harassing one of the finest soldiers this country has ever produced. Sergeant First Class Marcus Thompson served 3 tours in Afghanistan as a sniper team leader, confirmed over 200 enemy kills, and saved more American lives than any of you will save in your entire civilian careers. The bar fell silent as Chen continued, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had served in combat and understood the price of freedom. 3 years ago, Sergeant Thompson was providing overwatch protection for a convoy moving through the Kunar province when his position came under attack from a coordinated Taliban assault. He could have withdrawn to safety but chose to maintain his position to provide covering fire for American soldiers who were trapped in the ambush. Marcus shifted uncomfortably in his wheelchair, never having wanted his story told in public spaces or used to shame civilians who couldn't understand military sacrifice. He held that position for 6 hours, Chen continued, taking fire from multiple directions while coordinating rescue operations and eliminating threats that could have killed dozens of American soldiers. When the rescue helicopters finally reached his location, they found Sergeant Thompson unconscious from blood loss, still gripping his rifle, still watching for threats. The silence in the bar was now complete, broken only by the distant sound of traffic and the hum of refrigeration units. Staff Sergeant Williams stepped forward, adding his own perspective to the story. The IED that wounded Sergeant Thompson went off during the final phase of the rescue operation. He was loading wounded soldiers into the evacuation helicopter when the blast caught him. He could have gotten on that helicopter first, could have saved himself, but he made sure every other soldier was evacuated before he would accept medical attention. Danny Walsh, who had been so cruel in his harassment, now looked like a man who had just learned he'd been attacking a Congressional Medal of Honor recipient. His friends had gone pale, finally understanding the magnitude of their ignorance and cruelty. The injuries he sustained during that operation ended his military career, Rodriguez added, but they didn't end his service to his country. Sergeant Thompson has spent the last 3 years helping other wounded veterans navigate the transition to civilian life, working with VA counselors to develop programs that address PTSD and adjustment disorders. Marcus finally spoke, his voice carrying the quiet authority that had once commanded respect in combat zones around the world. I didn't come here tonight looking for recognition or sympathy, he said. I came here because my therapist said I needed to practice being around people again. Needed to learn how to exist in civilian society without the isolation that's been consuming me since I left the Army. He looked around the room at faces that now showed respect, shame, and understanding instead of the ignorance and cruelty that had greeted him earlier. I chose this bar because I thought it would be safe, thought I could watch a football game and maybe work up the courage to reconnect with my military brothers. Instead, I found people who saw my wheelchair and decided I was a burden on their entertainment, a reminder of things they'd rather not think about. What followed was an impromptu lesson in military values, veteran affairs, and the civilian responsibility to support those who had served in uniform. The sniper unit didn't lecture or threaten. They simply modeled the kind of respect, courtesy, and mutual support that characterized military culture at its best. Rodriguez addressed Danny's group directly, his voice carrying the calm authority of someone accustomed to high-stakes situations. Gentlemen, I don't think you understand what you've been doing here tonight. You've been harassing a combat veteran whose sacrifice protected your right to drink beer and watch football in safety. You've been attacking someone who volunteered to face dangers that most Americans will never understand, who gave up his ability to walk so that you could continue living in a free society. Danny tried to offer an apology that sounded genuine despite his continued intoxication. Sir, we didn't know. We thought he was we didn't realize he was military. That's the problem, Chen replied. You didn't think. You saw someone in a wheelchair and made assumptions about his worth, his character, and his right to be treated with dignity. You didn't ask if he needed help, didn't consider that there might be a story behind his circumstances, didn't think that maybe, just maybe, he had earned the right to sit in any bar in America without being harassed. Sergeant Williams added his own perspective, shaped by years of combat experience and the brotherhood that had sustained him through multiple deployments. In the military, we have a saying, leave no one behind. It doesn't just apply to combat operations. It means we take care of each other, we support each other, and we don't let anyone face their battles alone. He gestured toward Marcus with obvious respect and affection. This man never left anyone behind. He risked everything to make sure his fellow soldiers came home alive. The least we can do is make sure he's never alone when facing ignorant civilians who don't understand sacrifice. As the evening progressed, something remarkable happened in Mickey's sports bar. The atmosphere transformed from hostile to respectful, from divided to united around shared recognition of service and sacrifice. Other veterans in the bar, men and women who had served in different conflicts and different branches, began approaching Marcus to express their gratitude and share their own stories of civilian challenges and military brotherhood. The bartender, Tom Bradley, who had remained silent during the harassment, approached Marcus's table with genuine remorse. "Sir, I want to apologize for not intervening earlier. I should have stopped the harassment the moment it started. Your money's no good here tonight, and you're welcome any time." But perhaps the most significant change came from the civilians who had witnessed the confrontation and learned something about courage, sacrifice, and the true meaning of supporting veterans. An elderly woman approached Marcus's table, her eyes wet with tears. "Young man, I want to thank you for your service. My husband served in Vietnam, and he faced similar treatment when he came home. It was wrong then, and it's wrong now." A young father with 2 children stopped by to explain to his kids why it was important to treat veterans with respect and gratitude, turning the evening's ugliness into a teaching moment about honor and service. Even some members of Danny's group, sobered by the education they'd received, attempted to make amends for their earlier cruelty. Tommy Martinez, who had thrown the beer bottle, approached Marcus with genuine shame. "Sir, I don't know how to apologize for what I did. I was drunk and stupid, but that's no excuse for disrespecting someone who served our country." Marcus looked at him for a long moment, then extended his hand. "Apology accepted, but remember this feeling, and make sure you never treat another veteran this way." As the bar gradually returned to normal operations, Marcus found himself surrounded by his former unit members, sharing stories and reconnecting with the brotherhood that had sustained him through the darkest period of his military service. For the first time in 3 years, he felt like he belonged somewhere, like he was valued for who he was rather than pitied for what he'd lost. Sergeant Chen sat beside him, her presence reminding him of the camaraderie and shared purpose that had made military service meaningful. "Marcus," she said quietly, "we've been trying to get you to come to unit reunions for months. Why didn't you tell us how hard things were?" Marcus considered the question, thinking about the isolation and depression that had consumed him since his medical retirement. "I guess I thought I had to handle it alone," he admitted. "In the Army, I was the one taking care of everyone else, making sure they had what they needed to complete their missions and come home safe. It was hard to ask for help when I'd always been the one providing it." Rodriguez nodded with understanding. "Brother, that's exactly why we need to take care of you now. You spent years making sure we had what we needed. Now it's our turn to make sure you have what you need." The conversation that followed addressed Marcus's ongoing struggles with PTSD, his difficulties adjusting to civilian life, and his fear that his best days were behind him. His unit brothers and sisters listened with the same attention they'd once given to mission briefings, understanding that Marcus's recovery was as important as any operation they'd ever conducted. By the end of the evening, Marcus had agreed to regular social meetings with his unit, had accepted invitations to speak at veteran support groups, and had committed to working with VA counselors who specialized in helping combat veterans find new purpose in civilian life. 6 months later, Mickey's Sports Bar had become something of a sanctuary for local veterans, a place where military service was respected and civilian ignorance was educated rather than tolerated. Marcus had become a regular, not hiding in corner booths but sitting at tables where he could talk with other patrons about service, sacrifice, and the ongoing challenges facing America's veteran community. The harassment incident had led to his involvement in veteran advocacy organizations, where his communication skills and combat experience made him an effective spokesperson for disabled veterans facing discrimination and adjustment difficulties. But perhaps most importantly, Marcus had rediscovered his sense of purpose and mission. He was no longer just surviving civilian life, he was thriving in it, using his experiences to help others and build bridges between military and civilian communities. The sniper badge on his jacket still reminded him of precision, patience, and dedication, but now it also represented something else, the ongoing mission of service that didn't end with military discharge, but continued through civilian advocacy, veteran support, and the education of Americans who had never served in uniform. Danny Walsh and his crew had learned lessons about respect, sacrifice, and the true meaning of patriotism that went far beyond flag-waving and political rhetoric. They'd become advocates themselves, ensuring that other veterans at Mickey's Sports Bar were treated with the dignity and respect their service had earned. The bar's atmosphere had been permanently changed by the demonstration of military values and the education of civilian ignorance. It had become a place where service was honored, brotherhood was practiced, and the gap between military and civilian communities was bridged through understanding rather than divided by prejudice. Before you go, I want to hear from you. Have you ever witnessed a veteran being treated poorly because of their injuries or struggles with civilian life? Have you ever been in a situation where you wish someone had stood up for you when others didn't understand your challenges? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might inspire others to show more courage and compassion. And if this story moved you, if it reminded you that our veterans deserve our respect and support long after their service ends, hit that subscribe button, because the values that make our military strong, brotherhood, loyalty, and never leaving anyone behind, are the same values that can make our civilian communities more welcoming, understanding, and supportive of those who have sacrificed so much for our freedom.